Joonho woke to the soft glow of Seoul's morning sun spilling through their apartment window. Beside him, Minji shifted slightly, her pregnant belly pressing against the sheets. She stirred, murmuring, "Joonho, coffee?" "I'll make it myself," he snapped, voice tight with irritation. Minji nodded silently, rising slowly, every movement deliberate and careful. Her shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of his constant disapproval. He watched her go, telling himself she was too sensitive, that her tears and silence were weaknesses he could not understand. The apartment felt empty despite its sunlight. Joonho drank his coffee in silence, his mind restless, replaying yesterday's arguments, calculating every perceived mistake Minji had made. He didn't notice her standing in the doorway, watching him with a faint, anxious tremor in her hands. Later, Minji tried to talk about her day, her voice small and careful, but Joonho's irritation flared instantly. "You're late again. Why do you even bother if you can't do anything right?" Minji flinched, fingers gripping the table edge. I'll be more careful next time," she whispered, swallowing the rising tears. She had learned years ago that showing fear only escalated his anger. Joonho turned away, scrolling through his phone, barely aware of the impact of his words. Inside, a fleeting flicker of guilt stirred before vanishing. He was too entrenched in his anger to notice how much she was shrinking under his words. In the evening, Minji moved carefully around the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a simple dinner. Joonho appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. She stiffened immediately. "Why do you act like you're always the victim?" he asked quietly. "I'm doing what's best for us." It hurts, Joonho." "You hurt me," she admitted softly. He laughed bitterly. "Hurt? You're pregnant. You're supposed to be soft, not whining like a child." Minji's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed openly. She nodded and retreated to the bedroom. Joonho watched her go, the emptiness in him sharper than any satisfaction he had ever felt from control. Later, Joonho sat alone in the living room. The television was muted, casting a soft flicker across the room. Minji slept quietly in their bedroom. He ran a hand through his hair, tension pressing down, a strange feeling twisting in his chest. He whispered to himself, I don't know if I can stop." The guilt was heavier than any argument he had thrown that day. He knew the distance between them was widening, yet he remained rooted in silence, afraid to cross the fragile line that separated anger from remorse. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic outside. Minji moved carefully around the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate with the growing weight of her belly. She tried not to wake Joonho, hoping he would stay in his corner, consumed by his own thoughts. But he noticed her immediately. "Why do you always take so long to do the simplest things?" he asked, voice sharp. She flinched and lowered her gaze, her hands trembling slightly. I'm trying," she whispered. His frown deepened, and he turned away, muttering under his breath about incompetence. Minji's chest tightened, the familiar sinking feeling in her stomach threatening to swallow her calm. Later at the dining table, Minji placed simple bowls of rice and soup in front of Joonho. He barely looked up. She picked at her own food, appetite gone, heart heavy. The silence between them was suffocating, louder than any argument. "You don't even eat properly," he said finally, voice low and tense. "Do you even care about yourself? About this child?" Minji swallowed, holding back tears. She wanted to tell him she cared more than he could ever understand, but she had learned long ago that words only fueled his anger. She nodded silently, pretending compliance, pretending that this life was bearable. By evening, Minji moved to the living room, trying to escape the oppressive air in the kitchen. Joonho followed, his movements deliberate, almost predatory. "Why do you always avoid me?" he asked, voice low but hard. I just wanted some quiet," Minji replied softly, eyes downcast. "You think this is quiet?" he said, his words sharp. "You think ignoring me solves anything? You've been avoiding responsibility, avoiding life itself." She flinched, a sharp pang in her chest. He was right in a way, she had been measuring every step, every word, every breath, but it was to survive, not escape. Minji felt the tears press against her lids. She wanted to shout, to tell him how trapped she felt, how heavy her heart was, how much she feared the man who should have loved her most. But she didn't. She only nodded silently, shrinking under the weight of his anger. Hours later, Minji lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her hands rested on her belly, tracing invisible patterns, thinking of a life outside this suffocating apartment, outside this relentless cycle of anger and fear. She imagined sunlight, freedom, and safety for her child. A quiet resolve began to form. She would not allow her spirit, or her child, to be broken here. Joonho sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her profile. The realization of his actions weighed heavily. He understood the depth of the damage he had caused, and fear, guilt, and helplessness coiled inside him. For the first time, he wanted to change, to repair the unfixable. But even as he wanted to speak, the words lodged in his throat. Minji woke up that morning with a tight pain in her chest before she even opened her eyes. Something felt wrong. Not physical, emotional. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like it was pressing down on her lungs. She moved slowly out of bed, one hand instinctively resting on her belly, whispering to herself that everything would be fine, that she just needed to stay quiet today. Joonho noticed immediately. He always did. "Why are you moving like that?" he asked sharply. "You're pregnant, not dying." The words struck her harder than usual. She turned to him, her eyes glossy but steady. "I'm just tired," she said. "Tired?" he scoffed. "You don't even work as hard as I do." "What exactly are you tired from?" Something inside Minji cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to hurt. She tried to explain, her voice trembling, how her body felt heavier, how fear kept her awake at night, how she was scared all the time. Joonho didn't listen. He raised his voice, pacing the room, listing every perceived failure, every imagined flaw, every reason she wasn't enough. His words didn't stop. They piled on top of each other until Minji couldn't breathe. She sank onto the couch, clutching her belly, tears slipping down silently. And still, he kept talking. After he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, the silence felt unreal. Minji sat frozen for several minutes, heart racing, ears ringing. Then it happened. A sharp wave of dizziness washed over her, followed by a deep, suffocating panic. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She tried to stand but her legs felt weak. She whispered her baby's name over and over, trying to ground herself. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. She wasn't sure if it was stress, fear, or something worse, but she knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Her body was reacting to the life she was living. She curled up on the floor, pressing her forehead against her knees, sobbing quietly so the neighbors wouldn't hear. She wasn't crying because of one argument. She was crying because this had become her normal. Because love was no longer safe. Joonho returned home hours later, anger still simmering, ready to continue the argument in his head. But the apartment was too quiet. No movement. No sound. When he found Minji on the floor, pale and shaking, something inside him dropped. "Minji?" His voice came out softer than he expected. She didn't answer at first. When she did, her voice was barely there. "I couldn't breathe," she whispered. "I was scared." For the first time, Joonho felt real fear. Not anger. Not frustration. Fear. He knelt beside her, unsure where to touch, terrified that he had caused something irreversible. The image of her crying alone replayed in his mind, and suddenly his justification sounded hollow, cruel, meaningless. "I didn't mean," he started, then stopped. Because intention didn't erase damage. That night, Minji lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Joonho's uneven breathing beside her. Her hand rested protectively over her belly. Something had changed. Not in him, but in her. She realized then that love was no longer the question. Safety was. And this place, this marriage, this man, no matter how broken or regretful, was not safe for her or her child. Beside her, Joonho stared into the darkness, wide awake, replaying the day over and over. He saw her on the floor. Heard her shaking voice. Felt the fear he had caused. For the first time, he understood that waking up as her worst husband didn't just mean being cruel. It meant destroying someone slowly. And he was doing it. Minji woke up to sunlight again, but this time it didn't matter. There was no tightness in her chest, no panic, no tears waiting behind her eyes. There was just nothing. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor, one hand resting on her belly out of habit rather than emotion. Joonho watched her quietly from the doorway. "Are you okay?" he asked, carefully, like the words might explode if he said them too loudly. She nodded without looking at him. "I'm fine." The words scared him more than her tears ever had. Her voice was flat. Empty. There was no fear in it, no pleading, no pain he could react to. She moved through the apartment slowly, efficiently, like a guest in her own life. She didn't argue when he spoke sharply. She didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself. Joonho felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't peace. This was surrender. The apartment became unnervingly quiet over the next few days. Minji cooked, cleaned, and moved through each routine without complaint. She no longer tried to explain herself. She no longer reacted when Joonho criticized the food or questioned how she spent her time. "You didn't fold this properly," he said one afternoon, waiting for her usual apology. She simply refolded it. No words. No eye contact. The silence crawled under his skin. He started speaking just to hear a response, but her answers were short, emotionless. "Yes. Okay. I understand." At night, she lay facing away from him, her body rigid, her hand always on her belly like a barrier. Joonho reached out once, hesitated, and pulled back. He felt like he was sleeping next to someone already gone. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and quiet concern. Minji sat in the waiting room, hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. Joonho sat beside her, restless, tapping his foot, glancing at her every few seconds. "She's under a lot of stress," the doctor said gently after the checkup. "Emotional stress matters during pregnancy. She needs calm. Support." Joonho nodded too quickly. "Of course. I understand." Minji said nothing. On the way home, he tried. "I'll do better," he said, voice tight. "I really will." She looked out the window at the passing city. Okay, that was all. No relief. No hope. Just acceptance. And that terrified him. That night, Minji lay awake, listening to the city outside. Her hand rested on her belly, and for the first time, she spoke honestly, not to Joonho, but to the life inside her. "I tried," she whispered silently. "I really tried." She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't afraid. She was done. She didn't imagine fixing the marriage. She didn't imagine him changing. She imagined leaving. Quietly. Safely. Without drama. Behind her, Joonho stared at the ceiling, chest tight, finally understanding something irreversible. He hadn't broken her in one moment. He had worn her down until she no longer fought back. Until love didn't even hurt anymore, because it wasn't there. And that was when he knew. He had already lost her. Minji woke before dawn. The city outside was still asleep, wrapped in a soft blue haze. For a moment, she lay still, listening to Joonho's breathing beside her. It sounded ordinary. Familiar. And yet, it no longer belonged to her. She moved slowly, carefully, as if the air itself might shatter if she rushed. She dressed in simple clothes, slipped on her shoes, and paused by the doorway. Her hand rested on her belly, grounding her. She did not look back at the bed. She already knew what she would see, a man asleep in the life she had already left behind. On the table, she placed a folded note, not long. Not dramatic. Just the truth, written without anger. She had learned that anger kept her tied to him. Calm was freedom. Then she opened the door and stepped into the morning. Joonho woke to silence. Not the tense silence he had grown used to, but something emptier. He sat up, confusion settling in as he noticed the other side of the bed untouched. He found the note on the table. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. She wrote that she had given everything she had. That she had stayed through fear, loneliness, and emotional pain because she believed endurance meant love. She wrote that pregnancy had taught her something important: love should feel safe, not heavy. Quiet, not terrifying. She didn't accuse him. She didn't beg. She didn't threaten. She simply said she was choosing herself and her child. And that she hoped, one day, he would understand what he had done, not to punish himself, but to never become that man again. The words hollowed him out. This wasn't abandonment. This was consequence. Days passed. Then weeks. The apartment felt smaller, colder. Joonho noticed things he had ignored before: the way Minji used to organize the kitchen, the faint marks on the wall where she measured time, the absence of her quiet movements. He replayed every moment he had dismissed. Every time she had tried to speak and he had shut her down. Every time he told himself it wasn't that bad. Now he understood. Abuse didn't always shout. Sometimes it eroded. Sometimes it made someone disappear slowly, right in front of you. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted to believe change would fix everything, but real growth didn't come with rewards. It came with acceptance of loss. Minji sat by a window in a small, sunlit room elsewhere in the city. The space was modest, but it felt light. Safe. Her hand rested on her belly as she watched the street below, people moving freely, living. For the first time in a long time, her breathing felt natural. She wasn't waiting for criticism. She wasn't bracing herself. She was simply existing, and that felt like freedom. She didn't hate him. She didn't love him anymore either. She had outgrown the version of herself that believed suffering was proof of devotion. Her child shifted gently, and she smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was finally hers. Joonho stood at the same window weeks later, watching the same city. But it looked different now. Sharper. Quieter. Honest. He understood something finally: not all awakenings lead to reunion. Some awakenings exist only to prevent repetition. He had woken up as her worst husband. And that truth would follow him for the rest of his life. Not as punishment, but as a lesson.